The night Emily arrived felt wrong from the very first second, like the air itself was holding its breath. Rain fell hard over the quiet Oregon street, blurring the yellow porch light and soaking the empty road, and Sarah stood near the front door with her heart pounding, already knowing who it was before the bell rang. Just an hour earlier, her phone had lit up with her sister's name, and the voice on the other end had been thin, shaking, and unfamiliar, a voice that carried too much weight for such a short call. Emily had not explained much, only that she couldn't stay where she was anymore, that she had packed what she could, and that she was driving with no clear plan except to reach her older sister's house. Now she was here. When Sarah opened the door, Emily stood on the porch with a single suitcase, her hair damp from the rain, her shoulders slumped as if the long drive had pressed every unspoken pain into her back. Her eyes were red but dry, emptied of tears, and when she spoke, her words came out soft and flat, as if emotion had already worn her out. She said she didn't know where else to go. Sarah didn't answer with words. She pulled Emily into her arms, feeling how stiff her sister was at first, how her body resisted, then slowly gave in, trembling as weeks or months of held-in pain finally loosened. The rain soaked their clothes, but Sarah didn't care. Inside the house, Mark watched quietly from the hallway. He had been folding laundry, enjoying an ordinary evening, and now that ordinary life felt like it had cracked open. He had known Emily for years through holidays and visits, but this version of her was different. This was not the lively younger sister who laughed easily and teased him about being too serious. This Emily looked fragile, like someone who had been carrying a heavy secret alone for too long. Sarah guided her inside, helped her out of her wet coat, and led her to the couch. Emily sat stiffly, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she barely touched, her eyes fixed on the floor as if looking up might make something fall apart. The house felt suddenly smaller, filled with something unspoken and heavy. Sarah told Mark, without hesitation, that Emily would stay as long as she needed, and Mark agreed just as easily, because there was never any doubt. Yet beneath the calm words, all three of them felt the shift. Emily was not just visiting, she was arriving at the edge of something broken. Sarah watched her sister carefully, noticing the way she flinched at small sounds, the way she held herself like she was bracing for bad news. Sarah wanted to ask questions, wanted to know what had happened, who had failed Emily so badly that she had driven through the night to escape, but she stopped herself. She remembered how healing sometimes needed quiet more than answers. Mark moved through the room carefully, offering space instead of attention, kindness without pressure. He noticed everything without staring, the way Emily's hand shook slightly when she lifted the cup, the way her breathing stayed shallow. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, steady, grounding. He told Emily she was safe here. It was a simple sentence, but it landed heavily in the room. Emily nodded, once, as if she wanted to believe it but wasn't sure yet how. That night, Sarah made up the guest room while Emily showered, the sound of running water echoing down the hall like a fragile shield. Sarah folded clean sheets with shaking hands, her thoughts racing ahead to all the possible reasons Emily might be here, all the ways pain could hide behind silence. Mark stood beside her, not asking questions, just present. When Emily finally emerged, dressed in borrowed clothes, her face looked softer but more tired, like someone who had finally stopped running. Sarah hugged her again, longer this time, and told her to rest, that tomorrow could wait. Emily whispered thank you, her voice barely holding together. Later, when the house finally grew quiet and the rain slowed to a steady whisper, Sarah lay awake in bed, listening to Mark's breathing and thinking about the look in Emily's eyes when she stepped through the door. It was the look of someone who had reached the end of pretending. Sarah knew, deep in her bones, that this moment was not just a visit or a family favor. It was the beginning of something that would test love, trust, and patience in ways none of them had planned. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the street clean, as if trying to erase what came before. Inside, 3 lives had quietly shifted, and nothing would return to the way it was before Emily arrived broken at Sarah's door. The days after Emily's arrival moved quickly but felt heavy, as if time itself had slowed inside the house even while life outside continued as normal. Emily slipped into a quiet routine, waking early, moving softly, and avoiding long conversations, and Sarah noticed how her sister seemed to shrink into corners, always choosing the far end of the couch, always keeping her hands busy as if stillness might bring back thoughts she wasn't ready to face. Sarah returned to work during the day, trying to act normal, but her mind stayed at home, worrying whether Emily was eating, sleeping, or simply sitting alone with memories that hurt too much. Mark became the steady presence during those hours, not because he tried to be, but because he was simply there. He never asked Emily to explain herself and never filled the silence with questions. Instead, he made coffee in the mornings and left an extra cup on the counter without comment, cooked simple lunches, and went about his day as if her presence was natural and expected. Emily noticed this quiet kindness. It made the house feel safer, less like a place she was hiding and more like a place she was allowed to exist. One afternoon, Mark found Emily sitting on the back steps wrapped in a blanket, staring at the yard with a distant look, and instead of asking what was wrong, he sat a few feet away and talked about small things, the weather changing, the way autumn always arrived earlier than expected. Emily listened at first without responding, but slowly, almost without realizing it, she began to speak. Her words came in short pieces, never a full story, but enough to show the shape of her pain. She talked about feeling invisible, about losing herself while trying to keep someone else happy, about waking up one day and realizing she didn't recognize her own voice anymore. Mark listened without judgment, without offering solutions, and that made her feel heard in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah saw the changes in the evenings when she came home. Emily's eyes held a little more light, her shoulders less tense, her answers less guarded. There was no sudden happiness, but there was movement, and that mattered. Sarah felt grateful for Mark's patience and told him so, watching his face closely as she spoke. He simply shrugged and said Emily needed time, nothing more. Still, Sarah sensed something shifting beneath the surface, not danger, not betrayal, but a quiet closeness born from shared silence and trust. She reminded herself that healing often required support from unexpected places. As the days passed, Emily began to help around the house, folding laundry, cooking simple meals, and walking with Mark in the evenings when Sarah worked late. Their conversations stayed respectful and calm, focused on books, music, and memories that didn't hurt too much to touch. Emily laughed once during a walk, a small sound that surprised even her, and Mark smiled without making it a moment. That restraint mattered. Emily began sleeping better, eating regularly, and spending less time alone in her room. Sarah watched all of this with mixed emotions, relief tangled with a quiet awareness that her home had become a place of deep emotional work. One night, while washing dishes together, Emily admitted she felt guilty for taking up space, for disrupting Sarah and Mark's life, and Sarah held her hands and told her she belonged here, that family wasn't an inconvenience. Mark nodded in agreement, his calm presence reinforcing the truth of Sarah's words. By the end of the second week, Emily no longer looked like someone running from something, but like someone standing still for the first time in a long while. Yet even as progress showed, an unspoken tension lingered, a sense that emotional closeness could become complicated if not handled with care. Sarah felt it in the quiet moments, in the way she watched Mark and Emily talk, not with suspicion but with awareness. She trusted them both, but she understood how fragile broken hearts could be. Still, she chose faith over fear, believing that kindness, when guided by respect, could heal without crossing lines. The house felt fuller now, warmer, but also more delicate, as if one careless step could disturb the balance. Part 2 of their story settled into this fragile calm, where healing had begun, trust was forming, and the future remained uncertain, waiting quietly just beyond the next moment. As weeks passed, the house settled into a rhythm that felt calm on the surface but carried quiet tension underneath, and Emily's past began to surface in fragments she could no longer keep buried. She never told the full story at once. Instead, pieces slipped out during ordinary moments, while chopping vegetables, folding clothes, or walking under fading evening light. She spoke of a relationship that had started with warmth and promises, one that slowly turned heavy with control, not loud or cruel, but persistent enough to make her doubt herself. She talked about how her confidence faded little by little, how choices stopped feeling like her own, how silence became easier than explaining herself. Mark listened carefully, never interrupting, never reacting with anger or pity, only steady attention, and that made it easier for Emily to keep going. Sarah listened too when she could, but Emily often opened up more when Mark was nearby, not because she trusted him more, but because he felt neutral, untouched by shared childhood memories or family expectations. One afternoon, Emily admitted she didn't know who she was anymore, that leaving had felt like stepping into empty space, and Mark told her that space could be the beginning of something new, not the end of everything. His words stayed with her. Sarah noticed how Emily grew stronger, how she stood taller, how her voice sounded clearer, and she felt proud, yet something inside her remained alert. She trusted Mark deeply, but she also understood how emotional closeness could blur lines if no one was careful. The moment that tested everything came quietly. Late one evening, Sarah walked down the hallway and heard Emily crying in the living room, the kind of soft crying meant to stay hidden. Mark sat across from her, not touching, not moving closer, simply present. Emily spoke through tears, saying she felt lost without the life she had left behind, even if it had hurt her, saying she was afraid of being alone again. Mark told her that missing something familiar didn't mean it was good for her, that strength sometimes felt lonely before it felt right. Emily looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, a longing not for romance but for safety, for understanding without judgment. Sarah stood unseen, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. She could feel the weight of the moment, the risk hidden inside emotional honesty. But Mark did not cross any line. He kept his distance, kept his words careful, and when Emily's breathing slowed, he gently suggested she rest, reminding her that tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. He stood first, giving her space, and that simple act told Sarah everything she needed to know. Later that night, Sarah and Mark spoke quietly in their bedroom. Sarah admitted she had been afraid, not of betrayal, but of how healing could pull people close in unexpected ways. Mark listened, held her hand, and told her he understood the responsibility she had trusted him with. There were no arguments, no raised voices, only honesty settling between them. Emily sensed the shift too. The next day, she apologized for putting emotional weight on them, and Sarah reassured her that healing was not a burden. Still, all three of them became more aware, more careful, respecting the fragile balance they shared. Emily focused more on rebuilding herself, applying for jobs, setting goals, reclaiming routines that made her feel independent again. The house felt quieter but steadier, no longer filled with raw emotion, but with controlled strength. Part 3 ended with all of them changed in small but important ways, having faced a moment that could have broken trust but instead proved it, showing that real care was not about crossing boundaries, but about protecting them, even when emotions ran deep and the heart felt vulnerable. By the time summer began to fade, the house no longer felt heavy, and Emily's presence had shifted from fragile to steady, as if the broken pieces she arrived with had slowly found their place again. She woke with purpose now, running in the mornings, returning with flushed cheeks and clear eyes, then heading out to interviews until she finally landed a job at a small neighborhood bookstore, a place that smelled of paper and quiet hope. Each step forward gave her confidence, and Sarah watched with pride as her sister laughed more easily and spoke with certainty about plans that once felt impossible. Mark continued to support her in simple ways, offering rides when needed, celebrating small wins without making them feel large, and slowly stepping back as Emily no longer needed constant reassurance. The balance Sarah once worried about settled naturally, replaced by trust strengthened through honesty and restraint. One evening, Emily announced she had found her own apartment nearby, modest but bright, and the news filled the room with mixed emotion, happiness tinged with the sadness of endings. They spent her final week together packing boxes, sharing meals, and remembering how far she had come since that rainy night. On her last evening in the house, the three of them sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, the air warm and peaceful, and Emily thanked them both, not with dramatic words, but with quiet truth, saying she had learned that being supported didn't mean being saved. Sarah squeezed her hand, telling her she had always been stronger than she knew, and Mark added that strength grew when someone finally listened to it. Later, after Emily went to bed, Sarah and Mark sat together in the quiet living room, reflecting on the months that had tested them in unexpected ways. Sarah admitted she had been afraid at times, afraid of losing balance, afraid of misunderstanding her own feelings, and Mark reminded her that trust was not about avoiding fear, but choosing respect when fear appeared. When moving day came, Emily hugged them both, standing taller than she had when she arrived, her eyes bright with nervous excitement rather than pain. As she drove away, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace, knowing her sister was leaving whole, not running anymore, but moving forward by choice. Life returned to a quieter rhythm after that, but it was different, richer, shaped by what they had shared. Sarah and Mark found their marriage strengthened, not strained, by the experience, grounded in honesty and proven care. Emily visited often, always smiling, always growing, and the memory of her arrival remained not as a wound, but as a reminder that healing could happen without breaking trust, that love could be strong and gentle at the same time, and that sometimes the most powerful help came not from crossing boundaries, but from honoring them fully.